Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. April 2025, Brazil. In one of the quiet neighborhoods of Cuiabá, everything seemed normal. The streets carried on with their usual rhythm, a few pedestrians, the hum of passing cars, distant voices. Life behind the facades of modest homes moved along routinely, predictably. But in one of those homes, something was different. At first glance, it blended in perfectly. Only later would it become the focal point of a criminal investigation. During the day, people entered the house. By evening, they left. No yelling, no loud noises, no visible signs of distress. Just silence behind a tightly shut door. Passers-by noticed nothing unusual. The windows were curtained, the car parked neatly in front. Only later would it become clear. During those very hours, behind that door, something was happening that no one could have imagined. Eloísa Maria de Alencastro Sousa was born in 2008 in Cuiabá, in the state of Mato Grosso. She lived with her mother and grandmother. The family led a peaceful, low-profile life, blending into their surroundings. Her mother, Sulan, worked to support the household and took care of her daughter. Eloísa studied at a private school, the Adventist College in the Centro Político Administrativo district. She was a dedicated student, never causing trouble in class or in her interactions with teachers. Quiet during lessons, she always completed her assignments and stayed out of conflicts. Eloísa didn't have many close connections. Her only close friend, someone she trusted enough to share personal thoughts, would later mention that Eloísa might have exhibited signs consistent with level 1 autism spectrum traits. While this was never officially diagnosed, her behavior matched many descriptions: reserved demeanor, avoidance of eye contact, and anxiety in social settings. Yet she remained warm and approachable with those she trusted. Her biggest passion was animals. Eloísa dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She was serious about it, already looking into veterinary programs and exploring the field from an early age. According to her grandmother, she was helpful around the house and didn't need constant supervision. She could cook, clean, and take care of the family pet on her own. It was the ordinary life of a focused teenager, moving steadily toward her goals without drawing attention. Benedito Anunciação de Santana was born in 1984, also in Mato Grosso, to a modest family. He was the younger of two brothers. The older, Alcino, would later become involved in a legal case linked to a violent crime against his former partner. Their father worked as a laborer, and their mother stayed home. The family lived in a suburb of Cuiabá. According to neighbors, both boys were reserved from a young age and didn't share a close relationship with their parents. As a teenager, Benedito began attending a local Catholic church, eventually helping out during services. This connection to the religious community later became a part of his public persona. After finishing school, Benedito landed an entry-level job at a local government agency. Over time, through personal connections and a reputation for being diligent, he moved up the ranks. At the time these events unfolded, Benedito held the position of head of the Transportation Division at the Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation in the state of Mato Grosso. He earned a steady paycheck, had access to a work-issued vehicle, and was viewed as someone with a reliable social standing. In everyday life, he lived in the Ribeirão do Lipa neighborhood, where he was a familiar face at community meetings. He frequently attended local gatherings, voiced concerns about neighborhood issues, and proposed initiatives. He remained active in church, continuing to serve in the role of acolyte during services. On social media, he regularly posted religious content, quotes, snapshots from events, and images featuring places of worship. Most of his photos included his son, Gustavo, or were taken in front of churches and community celebrations. His online presence painted the picture of a stable, respectable man with deep faith. Little is known about Benedito's personal life prior to meeting Sulan. At the time their relationship began, he wasn't married and wasn't living with the mother of his son. No formal records exist regarding past relationships. Judging by his behavior, he carefully kept his personal history at a distance, maintaining only the aspects that supported his public image. Sulin worked at a government agency in Cuiabá, and it was through her professional environment that she met Benedito Anunciação de Santana. At first glance, he came across as confident, friendly, and composed. He was consistently polite, calm, and quick to offer help to colleagues. Within the workplace, he had a reputation for being a reliable and committed employee. This outward impression played a major role in Sulin's decision to allow him into her life. According to publicly available information, their relationship began about 4 months prior to the events in question. Some reports claimed they were only together for around 2 months, but investigators obtained evidence showing that Benedito had unrestricted access to her home and regularly used her keys. This supports the idea that their relationship may have been more serious and long-term than it initially appeared. Benedito quickly became a fixture in Suelin's home life. He started coming over unannounced, moved about the home comfortably, and didn't treat his presence as temporary or informal. His involvement in daily family routines was seen as something natural. To outsiders, it looked like he cared, wanted to help, and was making an effort to be part of the household. He wasn't aggressive, didn't raise his voice, and had a way of putting people at ease, especially during the early weeks. It seems Sulin didn't notice anything concerning. She viewed him as someone who could offer stability and support. He was older, held a steady job, and gave the impression of being responsible and mature. Inside the house, however, the dynamics were far from harmonious. Eloisa's grandmother, who lived with them, often felt uneasy about Benedito's frequent presence. It wasn't hostility that concerned her. It was the opposite. His over-the-top politeness and exaggerated gentleness felt forced. He was always trying to please, but in a way that seemed staged. Eloisa herself felt an immediate sense of discomfort from their earliest interactions. She didn't argue with him or cause any tension, but she clearly avoided engaging with him. She only confided her feelings to a close friend, explaining that she found Benedito unsettling, but couldn't fully articulate why. She was bothered by the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, and especially the way he posed in photos. What stood out most to her were his social media posts, where he made hand gestures that reminded her of criminal group symbols. She told her friend bluntly that he looked like someone connected to a shady background. Still, she kept this opinion to herself when it came to her mother, possibly out of fear of being misunderstood. According to her friend, Sulin either didn't notice her daughter's change in behavior or didn't think it was significant. No one in the household asked questions about Benedito's past, his social circle, or his former relationships. His behavior never raised red flags, which made him even more dangerous. A person perceived as just decent had already secured a trusted place in their lives without attracting suspicion. Only Eloisa, without needing concrete reasons, sensed that something was off. Tuesday, April 22, 2025, a typical weekday in Cuiabá. Around 3 p.m., Sulin and her mother were both at work. Eloisa was home alone. She wasn't expecting any visitors, and no unfamiliar vehicles were reported in the driveway. Everything appeared calm. Around that time, Benedito Anunciação de Santana arrived at Suelin's house, driving a government-issued Fiat Toro assigned to his position at the Secretariat of Science and Technology. In the vehicle with him were 3 teenagers, his son Gustavo and 2 others, ages 16 and 17. All 3 had been briefed ahead of time. They remained hidden inside the vehicle to avoid drawing attention from neighbors or security cameras. The plan was to wait until the house was empty of adults. Benedito parked the vehicle inside the garage. He entered the house alone. Surveillance footage shows he stayed inside for about 15 minutes. Then he returned to the car and drove away. The cameras didn't capture anything suspicious. He appeared calm. No neighbors reported hearing any noise or witnessing signs of aggression. But in that short window, Benedito had let the 3 teens into the house, leaving them inside with 16-year-old Eloisa, who had no idea what was coming. According to one of the confessions, they waited until Benedito had left the property. That's when they began to carry out the plan. Eloisa was inside by herself. When she saw the unfamiliar faces, she panicked. She tried to run into another room, but one of them caught up to her. She was disoriented, too shocked to scream or resist. They tied her legs. What followed took place in a room where, tragically, her life was ended using a USB cable. The investigative team worked to determine who played what role in the act, based on testimony and forensic evidence. One of the teens later admitted that he was the one who pulled the cable, saying he did so under instructions from the older individual. At the time of the crime, Benedito was not physically inside the house. He had left, allegedly for a work-related call. However, according to testimony, he was fully aware of what was taking place. Instructions had been given in advance. It was all part of the plan, to remove himself from the immediate scene so as not to be directly implicated. Participants stated that he emphasized everything had to be done right, and that the incident should look like a break-in with the intent to steal. After the act, the teens remained inside, waiting for the next phase, Sulin's return. According to their accounts, things moved quickly. Eloisa lost consciousness due to restricted breathing while lying on the floor. One of the assailants checked for a pulse and signs of breath, but claimed she was unresponsive. They used ropes and bed sheets to move her. The body was wrapped, dragged into another room, temporarily hidden, and the house was then ransacked to make it appear as though a burglary had taken place. Roughly 30 minutes passed between the time of the crime and Benedito's return. This time, he didn't pull into the garage. Instead, he parked further away and walked to the house. Inside, the others had already staged the scene. The next phase of their plan was to simulate an attack on Sulin. By 6 p.m., Sulin returned home with a relative, a woman holding an infant. Security cameras captured them approaching the property. Everything appeared normal from the outside, but inside, the perpetrators were preparing to act. The lights were off, but the air conditioning was running, which immediately raised Suelin's suspicions. She called out loudly for Eloisa, but there was no response. As they entered the home, the three teens sprang into action. They assaulted Suelin, used force to bring her to the ground, delivered several blows, tied her up, and dragged her deeper into the house. The woman carrying the infant was not harmed. She was told to sit quietly against the wall and not interfere. The infant remained in her arms. The attackers did not show aggression toward them. Sulin didn't immediately understand what was happening. She had been tied up, physically assaulted, and isolated in one of the rooms. She believed a robbery was in progress, and that her daughter was possibly tied up elsewhere in the house. No explanations were given. The intruders didn't reveal names or faces. However, at one point, Sulin recognized the voice of one of them. It was Gustavo, Benedito's son. That's when she began to realize this was not a random attack. After isolating Suelin, the group began removing valuables from the house. They loaded a TV, electronics, documents, and the sheet containing Eloisa's body into a vehicle. Everything was done swiftly and efficiently. The vehicle used belonged to Suelin. They used her own car to transport the stolen items. Neither neighbors nor people nearby noticed anything suspicious. Once everything was loaded, the group left the house. Sulin remained inside, tied up and injured, with no idea what had really happened. She believed that Eloisa had been taken. No one told her the truth. The crime had been disguised as a robbery with an abduction. The scene was left in disarray, cabinets forced open, lights cut, a mess left behind. It looked like a chaotic break-in, but in reality, it had been carefully planned step by step. The individuals involved had hoped their actions would be interpreted as a standard home invasion. Sulin had no idea that the worst had already happened. Shortly after the others left, Benedito appeared near the house again. He didn't go in right away. Instead, he waited outside until he was sure everything was done. When he entered, Sulin, still bound and shaken, told him that a group of young males had broken in, attacked her, taken items from the house, and left with Eloisa. Benedito's reaction was performative. He acted surprised, worried, and rushed. But by that point, he already knew exactly what had occurred. He just played the part of someone hearing it for the first time. Benedito was the one who suggested taking Sulin straight to the nearest urgent care clinic located in the Leblon area. On the way, he began calling contacts, sending voice messages, and preparing social media posts. His behavior was carefully crafted to present himself as a distressed and concerned stepfather in desperate need of help. He contacted friends, claimed his stepdaughter had been abducted, and urged them to spread the word. He published a social media post featuring Eloise's photo along with an emotional plea for assistance, stating she was missing and that he needed everyone's support. When they arrived at the hospital, Sulin was brought in a wheelchair. Surveillance footage showed Benedito helping her into the building, speaking to medical staff, and remaining close by. He made no effort to avoid cameras. In fact, it appeared he wanted to be seen. Authorities launched an investigation immediately after receiving the report of an assault and possible abduction. While Sulin was being treated, police took her statement and began gathering evidence. The first step was tracking the vehicle, a silver Hyundai registered to Sulin. Surveillance systems traced the car's route. Cameras captured it traveling along Dubai Avenue, then heading toward the area between Ribeirão do Lipa and the highway leading out to Guia. In that vicinity, investigators discovered a white bundle made from bedsheets, license plates, and signs that the vehicle had stopped there. Nearby, they found an old concrete well. That's where the body had been disposed of. Fire department personnel were called in to safely recover the remains. Forensic experts determined that the lower legs had been bound and that there were markings around the neck consistent with restricted breathing. There were no clear signs of physical struggle. A foot fracture appeared to have occurred after passing, likely during the fall into the shaft. By this point, investigators had already begun focusing on individuals close to the family. Reviewing surveillance footage, they noticed Benedito's behavior, his conspicuous effort to present himself as a victim. But Sulin's testimony, the vehicle's path, and forensic findings began to paint a conflicting picture. Meanwhile, investigators started compiling information about Benedito's son, Gustavo. The first arrest came quickly. A 17-year-old teen involved in the crime was found hiding in an apartment in a housing complex in Ribeirão do Lipa. He did not resist and surrendered immediately. During questioning, he gave a detailed statement. He named all participants, including Gustavo, the second teen, and Benedito as the orchestrator. The teen explained how the group operated, where they hid, how tasks were assigned, who came up with the plan, and how the act was carried out. Using that information, investigators tracked down Gustavo's location. He was staying at his grandmother's house. Law enforcement arrived and arrested him without incident. Gustavo confirmed the previous testimony, didn't deny his involvement, and explained how his father had instructed him to gather people, outlined the plan, and personally involved him in the attack. His statement made it clear that Benedito had initiated the entire plot, and Gustavo participated in hopes of earning his father's approval. The final arrest was of the 16-year-old, who had been hiding in an overgrown lot in the Tropicalville area. He was found in possession of some of the stolen property, documents, and small electronics. He admitted to participating, but offered fewer details. Nonetheless, by the time of his arrest, the investigation already had a full picture. Recovered items were found at the locations identified by the suspects, but the most significant evidence was their consistent testimonies. These accounts revealed how the crime had been planned, who was responsible for what, how they moved through each stage, and in what sequence. Technical evidence had already placed Benedito at the center, but now it was supported by direct confessions. After all individuals involved in the case had been taken into custody, Benedito was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of the crime and that he, too, was shocked by what had happened. His statements directly contradicted the confessions provided by the others. Investigators decided to arrange a confrontation. The first face-to-face was between the 17-year-old teen and Benedito. When asked to speak, the teen didn't hesitate. He stated clearly that Benedito had given the order, brought them to the house, and left them there to carry out the plan. He identified Benedito as the mastermind and explained how he had received specific instructions. Benedito tried to defend himself, calling the teen a liar and emotionally unstable. He insisted he would never allow harm to come to Eloisa and claimed he barely knew the teens his son spent time with. But things shifted when Gustavo entered the room. His response was unexpected. He looked his father in the eyes and said, "You're trying to run again? Like before? You left my life once. Now you're leaving me here to face this alone? Just admit this was your plan." A long silence followed. Gustavo's words were a turning point. He wasn't trying to excuse himself. He openly stated that he had followed his father's orders. The emotion in his voice was a mix of anger and heartbreak. Investigators noted that this was the moment Benedito's story began to change. He grew vague, deflected blame, and avoided specifics. Later, Benedito offered a new version of events. He claimed that Sulin had allegedly told him her daughter was exploring non-traditional personal identity and that she had supposedly asked him to remove the influence. According to his story, he interpreted this as a call to action. However, no evidence supported this claim. In fact, Eloisa's close friend informed investigators that she had never expressed romantic interest in anyone, avoided personal topics, and had never pursued any relationships. Her family confirmed that she lived in a private, inward world, showing no interest in intimacy or forming social bonds. This attempt to shift blame onto Sulin was seen as a clear strategy to avoid responsibility. Investigators found no indication that Sulin had any role in planning the crime. Benedito began to construct a narrative where he was a victim of circumstances, misunderstood someone's words, and never gave direct instructions. During psychological profiling, investigators noted signs of manipulative behavior. Benedito had a consistent pattern of influencing others while staying in the background, leaving no direct traces and maintaining control from a distance. Testimonies from the teens emphasized one point clearly. Benedito was the driving force but took great care to avoid direct participation. He assigned roles, gave instructions, timed the events, and maintained an external alibi. It also emerged that in 2020, Benedito's biological brother, Alcino Anunciação de Santana, had been convicted of a violent crime against his former spouse. The incident took place in broad daylight, with fatal injuries inflicted during the attack. At the time, Alcino was already under restraining orders, but that hadn't stopped him from following through with his actions. While legally unrelated to Benedito's case, investigators couldn't ignore the disturbing pattern of aggressive behavior in the Anunciação family. Against the backdrop of the investigation, Benedito's true character emerged more clearly, as someone deeply manipulative and calculated. Not only had he involved teenagers in a serious crime, but he deliberately used his own son, assuming he would remain silent. His actions were cold, deliberate, and showed no hesitation. All attempts to spin a different version of events soon collapsed. His co-conspirators' testimonies, combined with hard evidence, formed a consistent narrative against him. Faced with undeniable facts during questioning, Benedito began to confess. In a conversation with investigators, he admitted that shortly before the crime, he had seen messages between Sulin and her former partner. He interpreted this as betrayal. According to him, he felt used and discarded, and that something snapped inside him. Benedito stated, "I didn't plan to take her life. I just wanted her to understand what it feels like to lose something. If she lost her daughter, she'd never recover. That was the punishment." He also acknowledged that Eloisa irritated him. He knew she didn't accept him and said she always looked at him with suspicion. However, he denied any personal hatred toward her, claiming he was only trying to restore fairness in his relationship with her mother. This confession was the final confirmation that the crime was not impulsive. It wasn't driven by greed or fear of exposure. It was rooted in a deeply personal desire for revenge, to break someone emotionally and establish dominance, all masked by the appearance of being a respectable man. During the interrogation, it also became clear that the physical aggression towards Sulin was not a spontaneous act. It had been part of the premeditated plan to immobilize her, break her will, and create a convincing illusion of a robbery. Benedetto intended to use her physical state and emotional shock to portray himself as a concerned bystander and deflect suspicion. That's exactly what happened. At the time, Sulin had no idea her daughter was already gone. The assault and restraint were part of an elaborate lie. After the initial investigative steps, prosecutors officially confirmed that the case would be classified as a crime committed with premeditation and aggravating circumstances. The involvement of minors, the use of deception, the planning phase, a government-issued vehicle, and the staging of a fake abduction strengthened the prosecution's position. Benedetto Annunciação de Santana remained the central figure. He was arrested, suspended from his public office, and soon formally terminated. Given his appointed role within a government institution, the dismissal was expedited. Termination documents were signed on the day of his arrest. By the time the investigation was underway, all individuals involved were in custody. The teens were transferred to appropriate facilities. Gustavo, having turned 18, awaited legal proceedings in adult criminal court. Public reaction was swift and intense. The crime, committed against a young girl and involving her stepfather, sparked outrage. Local media gave the case widespread attention, discussing not only the brutality of the act, but the motives of control, dominance, and personal vengeance. At the heart of the public's concern was the issue of trust, how someone who appeared decent could plan such an act against the daughter of his partner. Sulin learned of her daughter's passing while in the care of medical staff. After the assault, she had been taken to the nearest urgent care facility for treatment. Initially, she believed Eloisa had been abducted and hoped she could still be found alive. But as the investigation progressed and the body was discovered in the well, law enforcement informed her of the truth. Her reaction was immediate and devastating. Witnesses described her as entering a state of hysteria. She had to be sedated. According to hospital staff, she screamed that she didn't feel alive, that everything was over, and that it was somehow her fault. Later, during her testimony, Sulin admitted that she blamed herself for what had happened. She said she failed to see the true nature of the man she had allowed into her life. To her, Benedetto seemed reliable, kind, attentive. He helped around the house, showed care, acted like a man of faith, smiled often, and treated her mother with respect. No one in the home ever saw him as a threat. Only Eloisa had distrusted him from the very beginning, but Sulin dismissed it as typical teenage resistance. She never imagined that someone she welcomed into her family would be capable of something so horrific. Sulin survived, but what she went through left her with a profound loss that could never be undone. After the investigation concluded in May 2025, prosecutors formally charged Benedetto Annunciação de Santana and his accomplices. The trial was held publicly and drew considerable attention from both the media and the community. Evidence presented during the proceedings included surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and confessions from those involved. Benedetto was found guilty of orchestrating and executing the crime. The court weighed the deliberate nature of his actions, the involvement of minors, and the level of cruelty. He was sentenced to 40 years in a high-security prison. His son, Gustavo Benedetto, who had reached legal age at the time of the crime, received a 20-year sentence. The court noted that his participation was intentional and that his age did not mitigate his responsibility. The two underage accomplices were placed in juvenile detention facilities for up to 3 years, pending behavioral evaluation and rehabilitation. Eloisa's memory lived on not only within her family. The school she attended issued an official statement expressing condolences and recalling her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Teachers and classmates described her as kind, quiet, and sincere. Her relatives urged the public to be more cautious about who we allow into our homes, especially when it involves those we care for most. The story of this family ended in tragedy, but it also became a powerful reminder. It proved that danger can come disguised as kindness, and that the role of the justice system is not just to punish, but to prevent. Surveillance technology, law enforcement, and digital evidence analysis all played critical roles in solving the case. But the most important defense remains our attention to the small details, those early signs that something just isn't right. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.